The late summer sun was slipping low over the horizon, painting the vineyard rows with a liquid gold that cast long shadows beneath the twisting grapevines. Felix wiped the sweat from his brow, the faint scar above his right eyebrow, tightening with the movement. His hazel eyes, flecked with stubborn green, rested on the nearly empty crate at his feet. The harvest was almost done, but the last section of vine seemed endless, the ripened clusters heavy and unyielding beneath his calloused fingers. Despite the warmth in the air, an autumnal chill was beginning to creep into his bones. He glanced toward the dusty dirt road behind the vineyard, where the first stars were twinkling pale and shy. It was getting late, but the harvest wasn't going to finish itself. His lean, athletic frame flexed as he stooped to pluck another bunch, the faint sound of grapes popping softly under his touch as the day's heat surrendered to cooler night air. The work was monotonous, meditative even, but tonight it dragged on with unwelcome weight. Then came an unexpected voice. "Hey!" Theo called out, stepping into the golden light, carrying the easy confidence of a man who owned the earth beneath his feet, even if it wasn't his own. His short dark hair caught the sun's last rays, reflecting a faint sheen, and that small silver hoop in his left ear caught a glimmer of light. Theo's broad shoulders and stocky build were silhouetted against the grape-laden vines, his deep brown eyes bright with an unspoken purpose. Felix froze mid-pluck, eyes narrowing slightly. "What you doing here?" His voice was cautious, the usual guard flaring up at the sight of his neighbor. Theo was, after all, the neighborhood puzzle. The man next door, who mowed his lawn with surgical precision, never seemed to carry more than a polite smile and a casual wave, and who, Felix was almost certain, looked entirely different under the surface. Straight, serious, unyielding. At least that's what everyone said. Theo shrugged, slipping his hands into his pockets and stepping closer. "I figured you could use a hand. This harvests a lot for one person." His tone was light but sincere, a slight catch betraying more than he let on. "I know it's late, but I'm nearby. Thought I might help." Felix's guard stiffened further. Help from Theo wasn't something he'd invited or expected. The man's kindness felt oddly out of place, like a surprising note in a familiar song. Still, tired and out of patience with the endless rows, he nodded slowly. "All right, but I don't do." Slow. They moved side by side through the rows, crunching leaves beneath their boots, the late summer air thick with the earthy scent of soil and fermenting grapes. The sun dipped lower, bathing the scene in that sunset glow that made everything seem softer, almost dreamlike. Theo's hands were sure and steady, his polite banter filling the gaps between the rustling vines. "So, what's the story with that scar?" he asked, nodding toward Felix's brow. Felix flinched just a little, the memory sitting somewhere sharp and distant. Old bike crash. "Nothing heroic," Theo laughed, the sound warm and low, and for a moment Felix's eyes caught a flicker of something unexpected. Care, maybe. "Figures. You'd make it out with just a scar." "And you?" Felix asked, glancing toward Theo's earring. A subtle silver hoop that caught the last of the light. "Never took you for the kind to wear jewelry around here." Theo's smile was tempered, but honest. "Guess I'm full of surprises." He twisted the hoop between his finger and thumb, a nervous habit Felix hadn't noticed before. "Sometimes I wonder if people look closer, what they really see." Felix didn't answer, but the unspoken words hung heavy between them, a fragile tension that neither quite dared to touch. Instead, they kept harvesting, the soft scrape of their hands moving rhythmically through the dusk. By the time the last grapes were nestled into the crates, the vineyard had plunged into twilight. Their shadows stretched long and mingled beneath the first emerging stars. Felix's muscles ached, but it was another kind of exhaustion that gripped his chest, one stirred by Theo's sudden presence, by the barrier the man seemed to be hinting at, but not crossing. They ended the night beside a small rustic cabin perched on the outskirts of the vineyard. The wooden exterior was weathered and worn, the smell of aged pine mixing with the fresher scent of crushed leaves. A single lantern flickered softly inside, but outside, the dark swallowed them almost whole. Theo leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, voice low and raw, with an edge Felix hadn't heard before. "I'm leaving," he confessed quietly. "In 3 weeks, going back to London." Felix's heart caught in the sudden stillness. The words landed like stones thrown into a silent pond, rippling out in loops of disbelief. "Leaving," his voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Theo shrugged helplessly, eyes dipping to the ground. "It's complicated. Work. Visa issues. Crate. Something I kept hoping wouldn't be real until it was too late." His voice trembled, the mask of calm slipping just enough to reveal the uncertainty underneath. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this time left." Felix shifted on his feet, the wind tugging at his shirt, a silent spectre in the cooling night. He wanted to say something, anything, but found himself swallowed by the weight of unspoken emotions, by the hesitancy of words, too heavy to speak aloud. Instead, they stood there beneath the vast, indifferent sky, the stars shimmering overhead like tiny promises flickering out in the dark. Theo's gaze flickered toward Felix's face, searching. Felix returned the look, eyes bright and steady, full of the questions neither dared voice. What now? What if? The night wrapped around them, thick and quiet, building a fragile bridge between two men who had, until now, lived parallel lives with only fence lines and polite conversations to mark their borders. The next morning, the vineyard was hazy with the soft golden light of sunrise. Felix was already at the edge of the rows, sorting through freshly picked grape clusters, when Theo appeared again. In his hands was a basket, overflowing with plump, purple grapes, their skins glistening with the early dew. "Thought I'd check on your progress," Theo said, setting the basket down with a small, hopeful smile. The gesture felt less like a casual visit, and more like a lifeline thrown across the distance between them. Felix blinked, surprised by the sight and the softness in Theo's voice. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." Theo's eyes lingered a moment too long on Felix's face, a vulnerability slipping through the cracks of his usual composed exterior. "And maybe I just wanted to see you." They settled into the rhythm of the morning, sitting together on a low wooden bench just beyond the vines, sharing stories with an easy openness that was new for both of them. Theo talked about his childhood in Scotland, about the quiet dreams he had tucked beneath layers of practical decisions, dreams that now trembled under the weight of his impending departure. Felix spoke cautiously of his life in the vineyard, the steady routine, the way the land felt, like a second skin. He told Theo about the solitary winter nights when the vineyard slept in silence, and how he sometimes imagined a life beyond these rows. As they spoke, their casual touches lingered longer, the light brush of their fingers when passing a grape, the accidental graze of arms as they leaned toward one another to see the same cluster. Each touch was a whispered question, a subtle invitation into a secret space neither quite dared to name. Theo's face softened in the morning light, his usual guarded exterior melting away to reveal a kindness and aching vulnerability that Felix had never expected to see. "Maybe I'm not as straightforward as I thought, or as I've let others see," Theo murmured, half to himself. Felix's breath caught the way Theo looked at him, eyes wide and searching beneath the surface, made something in Felix unclench a trembling hope stirred deep inside. It was dangerous, uncharted territory. But beneath the certainty of Theo's straight neighbor label, Felix glimpsed a man wrestling with his own truth, the kind that didn't fit neatly into boxes or polite conversations. And as sunlight spilled fully over the vineyard, warming the earth and their skin, Felix realized that this moment, these fragile shared hours, might be something neither of them had been prepared for. something no longer fleeting, even if the dawn that waited beyond the horizon would bring change too sharp to ignore. They were no longer just neighbor and vineyard worker. They were something else entirely. Two souls precariously poised on the edge of an impossible tender beginning. The sky darkened with a sudden rumbling tension that neither Felix nor Theo could ignore. The warm afternoon light dimmed as thick clouds gathered overhead, blotting out the sun and casting long shadows over the neatly arranged rows of grapevines. Felix was bending low, his fingers deft as they worked to harvest a heavy cluster bursting with ripe fruit, when the first drops of rain fell. Soft at first, a teasing sprinkle, before turning swift and insistent. "Rain's coming fast," Felix said, glancing up. The air thickened with that unmistakable scent, earthy, rich, and electric, all at once, and his skin prickled beneath the sudden drop. Theo looked over his broad shoulder, brows furrowing in that way he always did when thinking, a faint crease between his deep brown eyes. "We'd better find shelter. Come, Pa. The cabin's just this way." He motioned toward the small, weathered wooden structure resting at the edge of the vineyard, its pale walls faded from years under the harsh sun. They moved quickly, not a word between them, hands full of trembling grapes that needed to be put away before the storm soaked them. The rain hit in earnest just as they reached the cabin, slamming against the roof like a beating heart in the sudden downpour. Inside, the cabin felt impossibly small. The wooden boards groaned under the storm's assault, the dim light from a single oil lamp casting flickering shadows against the walls. They were squeezed close together, a tight fit between the stacks of crates and dusty barrels, the air thick with the sharp smell of must and fruit. Theo leaned his back against the wall, shoulders broad and steady, while Felix stood opposite, the space between them charged and fragile all at once. The closeness made Felix acutely aware of the heat pooling low in his stomach, a warmth beyond the muggy summer air. His voice caught slightly when he decided to break the silence. "I didn't expect this," he said, eyes shifting to Theo's face, studying the way the light softened his usually serious expression. You said you were just helping because you're my neighbor." Theo's lips twitched, the corner of his mouth curving in a ghost of a smile. "I didn't tell you everything, did I?" He pushed off the wall slowly, stepping a little closer. "I've always been curious about more than friendship. About what this could feel like here." The words landed between them like a secret, spilled out into the cramped space. Felix's breath faltered, heart thudding against his ribs. He wanted to say so much, ask if that meant anything real, or if it was just a passing fancy. But all that came out was a soft, "Really?" Theo's gaze darkened, vulnerability flickering beneath the surface of his guarded exterior. "Yeah. I've wrestled with it for years, thought I had it all figured straight, simple, clear-cut. But maybe things aren't so black and white." He moved the silver hoop in his left ear, a nervous gesture Felix had never noticed before. "Especially not when it comes to you." Felix's pulse quickened. The confession was a spark in the damp dimness, a spark that ignited a dangerous but undeniable hope. His hands trembled, clasped loosely in front of him. He wanted to reach out, wanted to bridge the tiny chasm between their bodies, but the weight of hours, days, and the impending goodbye settled on him like a heavy cloak. "I don't know what this means," Felix admitted, voice low and unsteady. "But I feel it too, even though the time feels wrong, because there's not enough of it." Theo nodded, eyes locking on his with a quiet intensity. "I don't care about wrong or right anymore. I just want this moment with you to not be afraid of it, to see where it leads, even if it's just for now." For a long minute they stood silent as the rain hammered the cabin roof, their breaths slow and sinking, the distance between them dwindling to nearly nothing. Felix's fears tangled with hope in a chaotic dance, fear of losing Theo, fear of what would happen after, fear of what this all meant for a man who had always seen himself as steady, uncomplicated. But hope, precious, fragile hope, thrummed beneath the fear, urging him forward. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving fresh scents of wet earth and green leaves hanging heavy in the air. Felix and Theo stayed in the cabin for a while longer, not wanting to break the fragile stillness that had settled between them. Eventually, hunger nudged them back toward reality. Theo pulled from a battered basket a simple meal, hearty bread, cheese, and a few plump olives he'd found in Felix's own larder. The two sat close on the narrow bench, the cramped space forcing contact, the brush of arms, the slight press of legs against one another. Felix felt the warmth of Theo's body in a way that was becoming hard to ignore. Their laughter came slowly at first, soft and cautious, then growing more genuine as the night wore on. And the comfort of shared food and broken bread bridged the chasm between uncertainty and companionship. Theo cracked a joke about the weather, something dry and sardonic, and Felix caught his breath as the smile on Theo's face deepened, a rare crack in his typical reserve. "You know," Felix said, nibbling thoughtfully at a crust of bread, "we don't have to pretend this is just some favor anymore. I want to savor whatever time we have left. No regrets." Theo's eyes lifted, dark and earnest in the flickering lamplight. "No regrets?" he repeated, as if tasting the words. "I like the sound of that. Makes this whole thing feel less like some weird detour and more like, I don't know. Like it actually matters." Felix swallowed hard, the raw edge of something vulnerable pressing to the surface. "I'm afraid," he confessed, voice fragile, "of being alone after you leave. I've never let myself want more than this little corner I inhabit here. Small, safe. But you stir something different in me." Theo reached out then, steady and surprising, wrapping his hand around Felix's in a way that sought to anchor them both. His thumb rubbed slow, deliberate circles across the back of Felix's fingers. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "Scared of what people will think, scared of what I might find when I let down my walls. But I'm tired of living behind fear." Their fingers intertwined, colors of night falling around their joined hands. Felix's heart surged with a fierce joy mixed with the bittersweet knowledge that the dawn would bring change. Yet in that moment, clinging to Theo's steady warmth, he didn't want to think about goodbyes or endings. This was new territory, messy, uncertain, but undeniably alive. "We're redefining ourselves," Felix whispered. "Right here, right now." Theo smiled, then, soft and real, the kind of smile Felix would carry with him long after the last bunch of grapes had been harvested. "Yeah, and who says straight means the same thing to us anymore? Maybe love doesn't have a label." For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. They had only this room, this night, this fragile connection set alight against the dark. The days following the rain were thick with the scent of ripening grapes and sun-soaked earth. With this, each morning, the light draped the vineyard rose in golden silk, warming the tendrils of vines like a blessing. Felix and Theo fell into a rhythm, working side by side beneath the sprawling blue sky, hands stained with juice and earth. The small touches continued, a hand briefly grazing a back as Theo reached for a basket, fingers brushing under the guise of adjusting a sleeve, a shared glance when one reached for the same grape bunch, smiles shy but unguarded now. The tension between them wove itself into the fabric of their days, a silent language conveyed in look and gesture, in the quickening heartbeat beneath work, gloves, and denim. Late afternoon, when the heat mellowed and the vineyard was awash with fading sunlight, Felix found himself longing for more, the simplicity of a lingering touch, the balm of a quiet moment spent leaning into Theo's strong shoulder. Once, when Theo handed him a cluster of grapes, their fingers locked for a moment too long, the pressure unmistakable. Felix dared to hold Theo's gaze. A blend of surprise and quiet yearning flickered in those deep brown eyes. It was as if both were desperate to ask the same impossible question, but neither had the courage to speak it aloud. Inside, Felix's mind was a tumult. He questioned every stolen glance, wrestled with his heart's growing ache. Was this just infatuation? Was Theo afraid? Was he clinging to a dream that would shatter under the daylight of reality? The labels they'd once worn like armor no longer fit the straight neighbor persona was unraveling, replaced by a fragile hope neither wanted to fully name. Theo was quieter these days, his usual confident swagger softened by a hesitant deliberation. There was something unspoken there, an invisible line Theo was wary of crossing, as if the fear of changing truths might shatter the fragile peace they had found. One evening, after the last baskets were full, and the vineyard bathed in the amber glow of dusk, Theo passed Felix a shared bottle of water. Their hands met, a lingering touch heavier with meaning, and Felix's breath hitched. The seriousness in Theo's eyes was tempered by exhaustion, but also, heartbreakingly, by longing. Without speaking, Theo stepped forward and enfolded Felix in a long, lingering hug. It was a simple gesture, but the weight was enormous, a silent confession, a promise, a question hanging in the space between them. Felix closed his eyes, letting himself feel the solidity of Theo's body against his own, the steadiness of his heartbeat beneath his ear. For a brief, shimmering moment, nothing else mattered. No deadlines, no labels, no impending goodbyes. Just the soft press of one soul against another, precariously poised on the edge of something new and terrifying and beautiful. As the stars began their nightly vigil overhead, and the vineyard settled into quiet, Felix knew the unspoken tension between them was now too raw to ignore. Love, in whatever form it took, had become their silent companion, fragile, imperfect, and fiercely alive. The night air was cool, heavier now with the promise of autumn, the vineyard's edges blurred by the soft haze of evening. Theo stood beside Felix, beneath the gnarled branches, the grape leaves rustling faintly above them, like whispered secrets. The stretch of land they had worked side by side was quiet, the day's labors folding into a stillness both welcome and uneasy. Theo's gaze hovered on Felix's face, too close to turn away, yet battling the hesitation that had grown between them like stubborn vines. "I never thought I'd say this," Theo started, voice low but steady, as if trying to catch the words before they slipped. "Not like this, not here, not with you." He swallowed and met Felix's searching eyes. "This closeness, what we've found these past weeks, it's opened up something in me I've been too scared to admit, even to myself." Felix's breath caught. He reached out a hand, tentative, and brushed a lock of sandy hair back from Theo's forehead. "What kind of something?" His voice was gentle, carrying a vulnerable thread beneath the calm. Theo's shoulders slumped slightly, the armor of his usual composure breaking. "Feelings. I never let in. I spent years telling myself I was fine, me life was fine because it was safer that way. Safer to ignore what's inside, to live on my own terms, on pages unwritten by anyone else. But with you, I can't lie anymore. I care, Felix, more than I ever thought I could. More than I thought I wanted to." The confession hung between them like delicate glass, dazzling but precarious. Felix's chest felt tight, a jumble of hope and fear twisting within. "Theo," he whispered, voice trembling just enough to betray him, "I'm falling for you. I don't know if this is forever, or if it's just for now, but it's real, and it scares me, how real it feels." Theo's dark eyes shimmered with something raw and fragile. In the fading light he reached out, fingers tracing a gentle line along Felix's jaw, a touch both grounding and electric. "We don't have to promise forever," he said softly. "Not tonight, not yet, but I want to risk this with you. To feel it, whatever it means. Even if it's just a moment, I want it." The defenses they both clung to, built over years, self-made walls, crumbled quietly. The silence that followed filled only with their shared breaths and the distant echoes of the vineyard, settling into night. Felix leaned into Theo's hand, closing his eyes, tasting the bitter sweetness of this raw unveiling. For the first time, the possibility of something beyond fear and habit hovered before them, shimmering just out of reach, fragile as the fading light around them. When they finally moved, it was in a slow gravity, a tentative surrender. Their fingers intertwined, two disparate souls tangled in quiet courage, and in that touch was the unspoken acknowledgement that they were both exposed, both holding hope and pain in equal measure. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The weekend air was alive with music and laughter, the harvest festival blossoming. String lights draped from tree to wooden beam cast a honeyed glow on the gathering crowd, the vineyards twinkling beyond the borders of the party like a sea of quiet stars. Everywhere people moved with unrestrained joy, children chasing one another between booths, elders swaying gently to the folk tunes, friends clinking glasses, overflowing with fresh grape juice, turned wine. Amid the revelry, Felix and Theo stood just off to the side, different worlds colliding in the glow of the festival firelight. The weight of the coming separation pressed on them quietly, beneath smiles that lifted and dimmed in the same breath. Felix felt the ache in his chest like a tender bruise, a bittersweet ache that tasted like ripe grapes and fading sunlight. "Do you remember the first festival here?" Felix asked, voice low and nearly drowned out by the music. Theo nodded, pulling a slow sip from his cup. "Yeah, I thought it was ridiculous. The whole thing felt so out of place with what I'm used to. Loud, noisy, too many people." His lips curved into a soft grin. "But you looked at it all like it was some kind of secret garden. Made me want to see it the way you did." Felix caught his gaze, a warmth blooming between them. "It was new then." "It still is." He hesitated, swallowing the lump of emotion rising. "I want to hold on to tonight, even if tomorrow is different." Theo reached out a hand, warm and steady amidst the fading summer chill. "Then, let's not let go yet." Their fingers closed around each other's as the first notes of a slow song curled through the air. The crowd parted slightly, and without words, Theo guided Felix into the center of the gathering. The world softened, the laughter and chatter blurring into a gentle hum as their bodies found a rhythm. Theo's broad frame enveloped Felix without the weight of expectation, the close beat of their hearts steadying the fragile moments hanging between them. Felix rested his head against Theo's chest, feeling the solid thump beneath his ear, the promise of grounding in the swirling tides of joy and sorrow. Around them, the glow of string lights flickered, catching the glimmers of sweat on Theo's brow, the faint scar above Felix's eyebrow, every imperfection made beautiful in the isolation of their embrace. "This feels like a dream," Felix murmured, the words almost a question, like something I'm afraid to wake up from. Theo's lips brushed a whisper against Felix's temple, tender and real. "Maybe it is, but right now it's ours. The here and the now we get to hold." They moved with a grace born of fragile trust, feet speaking the unspoken language of two souls, seeking shelter in each other. The music swelled around them, a hearty pulse of fiddles and drums, and for one incandescent moment, the entire vineyard seemed to pulse with their shared quiet rebellion against the coming day. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. The wood stove cracked and hissed, scattering warmth through the small room, but the space between Theo and Felix held a cold edge of silence, brittle and true. Theo sat hunched on the worn couch, shoulders pulled inward, as if to keep something fragile protected. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a mug, the rim chipped but well loved. Felix watched him, curiosity and concern knitting his brow. "I'm scared," Theo finally admitted, voice rough, more vulnerable than Felix had ever heard. "I'm scared of losing you, of walking out of here and never really knowing what might have been." He laughed bitterly, sound that caught in the chest. "I regret not living more honestly. not being braver with myself. I spent so long pretending I was okay with everything, but I wasn't. And now, having you here, it's only made the truth sharper, louder. Felix moved closer, settling beside him with a steadiness that felt like an anchor. He didn't need to say anything. At first, words were too fragile, too imprecise for the night's raw honesty. Instead, he slipped his fingers through Theo's, squeezing gently, grounding the fear and regret that clouded the room. "You're here now," Felix said after a moment, voice steady and soft. "And I'm here." "For what it's worth, for what we've got, that's real, and it's enough to hold on to, even if I'm miles away someday." Theo met his eyes, searching, desperate for the promise in them. Felix smiled a quiet, fierce affirmation. "These moments, they'll last, Theo," he said. "In the spaces between where we live and where we go, there's a place where this love, this strange new thing, we carried it together. It'll be our anchor when the nights get colder." Theo squeezed Felix's hand tighter. "I don't want this to be the end," his voice cracked on the plea. Felix looked away just slightly, swallowing the lump of impending goodbye. "Nothing will be the same after you leave. That's true, but, and this is important, I think we can be brave enough to carry this with us anyway. You taught me that." His smile trembled, but it was genuine. "I don't want to lose what we started, no matter how far apart we might be." A long silence stretched between them, filled with breathing and promises unsaid, but felt deeply. Theo's free hand came up to brush through Felix's hair, fingers threading through the sandy waves, as if trying to memorize the moment. Felix leaned in, letting the warmth of Theo's touch flood what the words could not reach. They sat together in the quiet dark, the vineyard's night pressing gently against the windows. And in that shared silence, the seeds of something precious were planted, vulnerable and wild and real. The dawn might bring parting, pain, the unknown, but for now, they were two halves of a fragile whole, holding fast to the love that had bloomed quietly among the vines. The vineyard felt emptier than ever on Theo's last full day. The sun hung low and heavy, bright but fading, grasping desperately for the edges of the sprawling green rows that curled and dipped over the hills like a wave, frozen mid-crest. Felix moved carefully beside Theo, their feet stirring soft clouds of dust that clung to the soles of their boots, the rich scent of crushed grapes and sun-warmed earth weaving between them. Each cluster they plucked seemed heavier than the last, not just with juice and seed, but with the weight of a looming goodbye. Felix stole glances at Theo under his lashes, seeing the way the lines around Theo's eyes deepened, not just from the strain of work, but from something else, something settling like a quiet storm behind deep brown eyes. He seemed quieter than usual, his usual straightforward, steady presence suddenly winding with a delicate, tense edge, the same tension Felix felt knotted in his gut every time their hands met for a moment before releasing the vine. Side by side, they worked. The rhythm of their movements, a fragile harmony of together and apart. Felix noticed how Theo paused sometimes, fingers lingering on a ripe bunch of grapes, his gaze drifting toward the valley below as if storing a final memory on his retina. In those silences, the vineyard's vastness pressed in on Felix, the familiar rose, now a cage and a sanctuary, all at once. And he felt every second ticking faster toward a time when this shared space would be theirs no longer. The light softened, and the grapes turned from bright clusters of green and purple to a subdued, almost glowing jewel tone beneath a sky streaked with apricot and ash. The hum of cicadas rose in waves, mingling with the faint chatter of birds settling into night. Between the rows, shadows lengthened and cloaked the earth in a gentle twilight. When the last basket was full, Theo dropped his hands to his sides and let out a breath one could almost see, radiate in the cool air. He turned toward Felix, the faint crease of his brow easing into an expression that held both longing and a fragile kind of hope. "Stay one more night," he said softly. His voice was almost swallowed by the twilight, but Felix caught it, a whisper, a plea, layered with something unspoken. Felix blinked, heart stunned into stillness. "One more night!" His voice felt rough in his throat, disbelief tangled with a sudden surge of want. Theo stepped closer, the faint scent of dry earth, and something woodsy enveloping Felix in a moment that felt impossibly intimate under the vast sky. "Please. Just one more." His eyes searched Felix's, searching for permission, for trust, for a chance that felt impossibly fragile yet fiercely necessary. Felix's own gaze dropped to the ground for the barest moment, wrestling with the knot of emotions spiraling in him. Could staying one more night truly extend the time between them? Could it somehow stretch the minutes, slow the relentless march of dawn? His hands twitched, aching to reach out, and then slowly, a small smile fractured the line of tension in his face. "Okay," Felix breathed. "One more night." They walked toward the farmhouse in a quiet, easy pace, a silent promise suspended in the cooling air between them. The harvest, the vineyard, the wide-open sky. Everything seemed to lean in closer, giving shape to the fragile bubble they now inhabited. That night, stars poured down like scattered diamonds, flooding the sky with their cold, ancient light. The vineyard rested beneath a quilt of quiet, the rose folding into shadows and subtle rustlings. Felix and Theo found themselves standing beneath a great oak tree at the edge of the vineyard, the bark rough and steady beneath Felix's fingertips, a grounding anchor in the dizzying fog of emotions swirling between them. Felix's breath settled on the crisp night air, forming tiny clouds that caught the faint glow of the stars. Theo stood close. So close the heat of his body flickered against Felix's skin, threading warmth through the night's chill. "I wasn't sure this would happen," Felix said quietly, his voice a mixture of disbelief and wonder. Theo's eyes shone in the starlight, the depths of them softened with vulnerability. "Neither was I." He hesitated, mouth moving as if to say something monumental, then falling back into silence. They neither pushed nor rushed. Instead, they moved with the slow gravity of something sacred, rearranging itself between them. Felix reached up, tracing the line of Theo's jaw with a tentative finger, memorizing the way the skin felt the faint shadow of stubble beneath his touch. Theo's hand found Felix's and held it, anchoring the moment in something steady and true. His palm was warm and sure, grounding Felix in a reality that felt both fragile and infinitely expansive. Then, almost without warning, Theo leaned in and their lips met. Tender, hesitant press that was at once a question and an answer. The kiss was hesitant, shy, a quiet promise blooming beneath the watchful stars. Felix's breath hitched as the world narrowed down to the heat of that small, trembling connection. It was soft, uncertain, but it held a universe of meaning. The weight of goodbye hung around them, but in that kiss was a fragile defiance against the ticking clock of separation. It was the blossom of something painfully real, an expression of hope, desire, and fear, all tangled in one perfect, fleeting moment against the infinite night. They stayed pressed together beneath the stars, long after the first kiss, exploring with gentle hands and whispered breaths, hearts thrumming in time with the hush of the vineyard slumber. Time seemed to fold around them, a quiet bubble where nothing else mattered but the connection growing between two souls who had found each other for a brief, blazing instant. When dawn finally stretched pale fingers across the sky, the world felt different, yet achingly the same. Felix lay awake beside Theo, watching the slow, soft light filter beneath the curtains, the shadows of night retreating like a tide. The harsh glare of reality pressed in, the knowledge that the day would bring departure, that the vineyard's quiet rose would soon hold memories without Theo's presence. The wooden floor creaked as Theo moved quietly, reaching for his things. Felix felt the sharp pinch of impending loss with every small sound. The scent of Theo's cologne left in the air, the lingering warmth of his skin on the sheets, each fragment a quiet declaration of the night before. "Felix," Theo's voice cracked, softly, steady yet raw. "I have to go." Felix nodded, lying still, the whisper of tears brushing his cheeks before he blinked them away. "I know." He dressed slowly, every movement weighted with the ache of farewell. In the kitchen, their hands brushed fleetingly, a last unspoken pledge, the gentle tether that would pull them back to each other, no matter the miles stretched between. Outside, the early light poured over the vineyard, gilding the leaves and turning the berries into jewels suspended in the arms of fragile vines. Felix stepped onto the porch. The morning air, cool and sharp, filling his lungs with a bittersweet freshness. Down the road, the car waited, engine humming like a heartbeat, ready to pull Theo away from this place, from Felix, from everything that had unspooled between them in these stolen weeks. Theo turned back once, his gaze locking with Felix's across the distance, a silent exchange, heavier than words. In that look lay hope and pain, promise and uncertainty, the unspoken vow that what they had formed would not be lost to time or distance. Felix stood firm, the vineyard stretching vast and wild behind him, endless rows folding into the horizon like the pages of a story yet to be told. His heart ached, raw with longing and tenderness, but beneath it burned a fierce, stubborn hope. Theirs was not an ending, but a beginning, fragile as a shoot pushing through dry earth, yet real and undeniable. And as Theo's car disappeared down the winding road, Felix folded the memory of the night before deep inside himself, a beacon against the darkness. The love between them had taken root, wild and fierce, planted quietly among the vines. And no matter how far the road might lead, that love was a place they would both return to. A fragile, fierce promise shining beneath the vineyard's endless sky.